So, Anish, what a joy to see you as a part of this forum. And I want to tell you a little bit about how this forum started. Actually, when the COVID crisis began, I was asking myself the question, what can I do to take responsibility to serve the well being of all? So, two things I did. One was this course on self leadership with a lot of people from different parts of the country and overseas attended. And the second was this Thursday conversation. So I said Thursday is an auspicious day, and let's invite role model leaders. Nobody has the answers to this crisis, but we could have an interesting conversation with people who, in our assessment, were real role models. And so it's become a very joyful. I look forward to every Thursday with a lot of positive energy, and so do everybody in the soil system. And people worldwide are watching this. So I want to really thank you, Anish. I've known you for a long time, and it's been absolutely joyful. And I want to tell you, the day it was announced that you are going to take over the CEO role from Anand next year, we celebrated. A lot of us celebrated because we said, Mahindra Group and Anand has established that you can bring in a leader from outside, help the person to really get onboarded in the right way, and then, of course, recognize the merit. So I'm so glad that that happened. So thanks a lot, Anish, for accepting our invitation to come here today.
Anil, thank you very much. It is indeed an honor for me to be here. You built a great institution in soil, and I've known you for many years. You're just a gem of a person, and for you to look at me as a potential role model is indeed an honor. Thank you.
Thanks, Anish. Anish, the question that I always start with, my favorite question,
Mhm.
out of all the different things you've done in your life, you've had quite an adventure in life, and you grew up in India, you got your initial education, then you moved to Carnegie Mellon, and you did some amazing things in your life. But out of all the things that you have done, what stands out for you as something that has given you the maximum happiness when you and other people who are important in your life, when you co-created something and did something that brings a smile on your face even when you recall that time now?
So to be very honest on that, Anil, the thing that really makes me the happiest and stands out is looking at our two boys. They've grown up to be really solid individuals, good values, and I've cherished the time spent with them. And this is one where it was a conscious choice I'd made many years ago, saying I will always work hard at getting ahead from a career standpoint. But weekends I will spend with the family. And I've worked 20 hours a day on weekdays. I've done lots of crazy things on weekdays, but I've always tried to keep that time on weekends with family. And it was always very clear with the boys, even when they're growing up. They had my calendar on Saturday and Sunday. They could say, you can do this, you cannot do this. And that is one that they've always cherished. They knew that they wouldn't see me on a weekday. And there are times in Mumbai now where my younger son says, Dad, I actually see you on a weekday evening. How strange is that? But they knew that Saturday and Sunday was theirs. And that is a time I've spent with them and with my wife, Snail, which is very precious and something that as I look back is what I would say is thankfully I made the right choice. I could have done a lot of other things with that time, but thankfully I made the right choice.
Yeah, and I know Snehal, your wife, extremely well. As you know, we were colleagues, and she's a very special person. And the kind of values you and Snehal have, and of course, I've had the joy of seeing your young boys when they were living here in the community, and to see, of course, their passion for cricket, for example, which I personally share.
Yes.
So yes, I think you've done a very fine job, the two of you and the two boys together, to create a role model family. So wonderful.
Yeah, and more importantly, I realized that that's time that never comes back.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of regrets that one often has in life, but at least this is one area where you need to spend that time when people are there. They've grown up
Wonderful.
now; they have their own lives. And we still spend time, but not as much. Right now, I have to get on their calendars for the weekend.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. Yes, Anish. Anish, this, of course, is the number one, because what happens in your own family and the joy that gives you then the anchor, the support, the strength to do everything else.
Mhm.
So now let's turn to the other side of your life, which is your professional life. So amongst all the things that you may have done, what are the moments that stand out for you as special moments when you did something that gives you lots of happiness?
So there are a few that really stand out. Um, One is working through a very difficult situation. And this was very early in my career when I was a consultant at Bain. And this was my first case as a team leader. And I was assigned to a case working for an oil rig company to reduce cost in the manufacturing yard. And I go to Louisiana, where they have these oil rig manufacturing yards, and go and meet the head of the yard. And he says, so the CEO in Houston sent you, and you're going to come here to help me reduce cost. And tell me, have you worked with oil rigs before? I said, no, I haven't. Have you worked in fabrication yards before? I said, first time I'm seeing one here. Are you an engineer? I said, no, I'm not an engineer either. And you're here to help me cut cost in my yard. And he was a 6.5 foot strapping, 300-pound guy. And I'm sort of, well below 6.5 foot. Uh, and I looked at him and said, yes, that's right. Right. And that was the start of the relationship, which was obviously not a great one. And as we went through the case with data, with analysis, we could show a lot, and actually did make a big difference. And at the end of the 3 months, he used to call me the little fella. And, he called Bain back and said, I want to do a second case as long as the little fella's leading it.
How
So that
wonderful.
that was one that gave a lot of satisfaction from a personal standpoint. Uh, the one that I would say gave a lot more satisfaction in the context of where we are today is more recently, as we look at the world being impacted with COVID, and obviously all our employees had lots of concerns about coming back to plants and working, concerns about their families, even for folks who've still been working from home. And we set up a system recently for our employees that has a number of touch points to give them comfort. First is we've got a 25 doctor panel that's available 24/7,
Wow.
and employees and their families can call up or do a video conference and talk about any symptoms that they may be seeing, and discuss the symptoms and see what needs to be done. If the doctor says you need to be tested, then we have arrangement for the person to be picked up, taken to a test center, or have the test person come home, get the test done. If it's positive and you need to be home quarantined, there's a tie-up for home quarantine. A kid goes out on day one with a pulse oximeter and medicines, and there's regular follow-up from nurses and doctors multiple times a day until the quarantine's over. In case there are some symptoms, we have or someone can't quarantine at home, there's a quarantine facility that we've set up. We took over a couple of hotels and got Fortis Hospital to manage the hotels, and got nurses from Tech Mahindra's nursing school because nurses were in short supply, and essentially have a quarantine facility that's managed by a hospital. So they will move patients to the hospital if symptoms go higher, and move patients back to the quarantine facility if symptoms are lower. A tie-up for medicines. Cipla's, in fact, joined us as part of this entire tie-up as well. So this was something that gave a lot of satisfaction to be able to do something that gave our employees a lot more peace. And especially at a time like this, we could see that making a big difference.
What a wonderful proactive step that shows that Mahindra has its heart in the right places. So thank you, Anish, for sharing that story. Now tell me, you were with GE for a long time. From Bain, you went on to one of those iconic companies, and You worked with GE in different stages of its changes in leadership as well. Out of all the things you did in GE, what stands out for you as something that was very special in that company and the work that you did there?
There, I would say it would be turnaround of the India business for GE Capital. And I was sent in with a very specific mandate. There were 12 businesses that were part of GE Capital India, both on the commercial and consumer side. And the mandate was shut down or sell six of them and grow the other six. Some that were being sold was already public information. It had already been printed in the front page of Economic Times. So there was a lot of angst amongst the employees as well. We had a very large employee base across all of these businesses. And it was quite a challenge to come in some cases, understand the businesses, get the employees to be somewhat stable and be transparent with them as to what was happening. And then we had the SBI card joint venture, which was a joint venture between two companies that are really very different. But it started with, again, a lot of angst because the joint venture hadn't delivered what it had a lot of accumulated losses. But we could get it on track and get it to a company that performed really well and has generated a lot of value eventually for its shareholders. But that journey was very satisfying. And working with the senior leaders at State Bank of India was an amazing experience. The people there are just outstanding, amongst the best leadership that I've seen anywhere, and was just a great experience working there.
Very nice. Now, Anish, whether it was GE or it was earlier in Bain or now the experience you're having in Mahindras, what have you discovered about yourself as unique qualities that you have, or the gifts that you have, that have really helped you to become a leader of consequence?
So I would say I'd focus on two of them. Mm-hmm. One is never give up. That's one thing I've had from many, many years ago. I'll always keep trying to, once I make up my mind on something, I always try and find a way around it. I won't take no for an answer. It started very early at Carnegie Mellon, in fact, where this was the early to mid 90s. And for some reason, we realized that we had to set up a network lab to do certain things that we wanted with regard to my research as well as some teaching. And this was a time when you really didn't hear about network computer labs. And I had to learn coding from a textbook or from certain books. And I remember sitting in the room there at Carnegie Mellon, sometimes till 8 a.m. in the morning, just working on figuring out how to do it, and found a way to do it, which when I look back, I think, I just don't know how that happened. So that's one quality that has stayed for a long time, which is there's always an answer to something. Just keep focusing on it and you'll find an answer. And the second part has always been the importance on people. I found that to be the most important thing that has contributed to my career. An old boss of mine very early on told me, Anish, you're as good as your team. So that's what I've done always, is try to get the best people on the team. Spend a lot of time in recruiting. Sometimes I will spend as much as 8 to 10 hours, at the minimum 6 for any new recruit that's coming in, especially on my direct team, and sometimes even at the second level. But that focus on people, understanding what they want, understanding what drives them, has been, I think, one of the things that has helped me along the way.
Anish, a lot of our values and the way we think are shaped by early childhood experiences. Yes. Also, the friendships that we have in our younger days, they seem to matter a lot. And I know that your mother might be part of this webinar because she probably is enjoying seeing her son, talk about himself. So what would you like to tell us about your early upbringing and the values? And of course, later on, Snail, met, and the two of you got together and raised a family. But tell us more about your early childhood and experiences and what contributed to these values that you carry deep in your heart.
So that has made really all the difference. And my mother, in particular, was a great inspiration. She was one of two women to graduate from IIM Ahmedabad in the second batch.
Wow.
And then she wanted to balance family and professional life, and therefore did not want to do a full-time role somewhere because she wanted to be at home when my sister and I came home from school. So she set up her own business, and which also was unheard of in those days. She made uh, printing and packaging business that made paperboard cartons for Colgate, for various pharmaceutical companies, and she grew that business, very well, could maintain that balance well. And one of the things I learned from her was, find a way to get things done. Don't give up. Um, you will find ways to do things, and there is no limit as such. So that was one major lesson, or one of many lessons that I would say. Uh, my father was a remarkable person, and he was one who always pushed me to do more. If I'd get 97% in a math exam, right, his question would be, what happened to that other 3%?
Okay.
And a lot of folks who know me would call me a perfectionist today, right? A lot of it comes from my father. And, while I did rebel against it from time to time, I ended up imbibing a lot more of those traits over time. And also his way of dealing with people and understanding people and helping others, I think was one of the key things that I picked up as well. And then to go further from there, you mentioned Snail. She's been a remarkable influence. And I can very honestly say I wouldn't be here if it hadn't been without her. She has really helped, I'd say, smoothen all the edges, and made me, think about others a lot more, made me realize that of life outside me a lot more, and made me a much better person.
Oh, nice. Anish, one of the most interesting things that happens is that very often we describe companies which become strong institutions. And you've worked with a top class consulting company called Bain, which is really one of the world's best. Then you worked with this huge company conglomerate, GE, which also is a household name. And now Mahindra, which also invokes tremendous amount of pride and confidence, in people. But out of all these cultures that you have thrived in and you are thriving in now in Mahindra, what stands out to you as the examples of a culture, and what stands out for you are the key to building a company which is a strong institution where the culture really helps in creating value in more ways than one? What stands out for you?
So I would say Mahindra by far, not because I'm here today, but let me outline the differences or similarities. Now, all three were very good in their own way, and I learned a lot through that. The Bain culture was one where learning was phenomenal. There was very direct feedback on things that you could be better at. I still remember in one of my early meetings, my manager telling me, Rishi, you're really not good at a lot of things. You know stuff very well, but you don't articulate it very well. And he also went on to give very good tips about what to do. He said, why don't you stand up and use a whiteboard? Use that as a means to articulate what you want, right? Because you're shy of speaking up in meetings. And that's one thing I've done a lot through my life. Right? A lot of people will now tell me the whiteboard's there, I'll go up to it and sort of use it in some form. So the Bain was a learning culture. You learned a lot. G was a culture that taught a lot about leadership, about how to run businesses. And I had the fortune of running a couple of big businesses in G as well, which helped a lot. Uh, but Mahindra is a culture that's a very different one. And this is one where I would look at Anand in particular as someone who's driven that. I've had many bosses over time that who have learned a lot from. Some have been very demanding. Some have been less demanding, but I've learned a lot from all of them. But Anand's style has been around empowerment and encouragement, and about how do we bring out the best in people. And to me, that's been remarkable. So I would look at what I've seen in Mahindra as how do you bring out the best in people. I've seen that in my own case, and that's something that I would say I'm still learning. But it's one that I've seen in many other people at Mahindra as well.
How nice. Now tell me, you were recruited by Anand at a comparatively young age, at a comparatively senior level, given a corporate staff responsibility to look at the future. And then, out of all the leaders, and Mahindra has quite a few talented leaders, the succession planning process, which was done in a very sort of comprehensive way, then the announcement of you being the successor. How did you feel at that particular moment when you were named the successor, or when Anand told you that you have to take on the baton to take Mahindra to the next level?
I would say I felt very humbled, very honored, and at the same time very confident. Having been with the group for 5 to 6 years, I felt that I could contribute, and it was a wonderful place to be. So, combination of all of those things, generally, yes, very happy.
Very nice. And Anish, I have met you several times after you joined Mahindras, and I could see that you had this very, what shall I say, very focused, very clear, and yet a very facilitative style. And I think, therefore, when you were chosen, I know that because several friends in Mahindra celebrated the fact that you were going to be the next leader. So, because you never threatened anybody, you never created anything, you didn't make, there were no issues about you being named. And that's speaks a lot of Mahindra. It speaks a lot of meritocracy and speaks a lot of how the process happened. But now let me turn to a question of a different kind. What is the biggest goof up you've ever done in your life? And what did you learn from that?
So, one is, I'd say we had a business that was a dot com in GE, at which, in itself sounds a bit ironic, but in 99, 2000, GE decided to focus a lot on e-commerce and dot-com companies. And basically, in Jack Welch's time, he said that I want our best people to focus on dot-coms, invest in dot-coms, set up your own dot-coms, and help digitize our businesses. That was a mandate. So as part of that, I moved to the .com team, and we had set up our own .com in the mortgage space. It was essentially a mortgage platform. So like Policy Bazaar is an insurance platform today, it was a platform to be able to get home loans at that point in time. And we could get a number of good companies. 5 of the top 10 mortgage lenders in the US came on that platform. But we really couldn't do much from an overall tech standpoint. We couldn't make it work. And that was a business where we had to go back to the CEO and say, sorry, this didn't work. Thankfully, we did that before he told us it didn't work. We had just got $5 million as funding for that business as a next round. And he said, look, you've just got $5 million of funding. Why don't you sort of try more and see if it works? And we said, look, he said, take 30 days, make sure you really are certain about your decision. And we then showed him, here's why it doesn't work. Here's why, we haven't been able to do the right thing. In some cases, technology isn't quite where it needs to be, and therefore you should fold us. And he looked at us directly and said, so you know what this means? You won't have jobs anymore. And, we realized that. And I remember my response to him at that point was, I'd rather put myself out of a job than have you put me out of a job 30 days later or 3 months later. And thankfully that worked. I could get another job in G and continued there.
Very nice. So this is a situation in which, everything turned out in the right way because you learned early. You didn't want to put good money after bad money, and you knew that the time had come to for you to say bye-bye to that business because you were not emotionally attached. But has there been any other particularly difficult moment, a dilemma, anything that you faced that, because a lot of us face those kinds of situations and dilemmas that then make us grow out of that and grow as better leaders? Anything like that in your life that you want to give as the biggest learning experience, or something that occurred out of which you learned the most?
So I'd say a few things across, and I'll sort of give 2 or 3 examples in that. One was at Bain, right? And at that point, this was early in my time at Bain. And on one of the case teams, I had made an error in certain information that was required. Uh, it was to do with looking at the financials of the company and making some assessments, and that embarrassed the partners in their meetings. And this was a very tricky case because we were actually recommending that the client shut down their business, and that error clearly didn't go well. So at that point, they were very upset. Um, Again, it was a learning experience for me in terms of making sure, really double check, triple check, make sure your work is 100% perfect before it goes in. But it wasn't a very pleasant experience at that point in time. So that was one on the personal front. Second, I would say, is more to do with people. And this is back to the G Capital days. We had one of our leaders who was a very good leader, and we had a role open for one of the businesses, and he was well positioned to take that role. But I won't go into the details of the case, but there were various other influencers that came in and said, that's not the right person for it. And I did not stand up to my own conviction. And it did not put that leader in the role, we got someone else in. Right? That was a huge mistake. That caused a lot more problems because we didn't get the right person in. The person who was supposed to go in then left the company and went elsewhere. That was a loss for the company as well. He was a wonderful person as a human being and also a very nice leader. And that's where I realized that, yes, I would take input from others, but I should not be swayed by others and sort of stand up to my own conviction. And life would have been a lot easier for me if I had done that way.
Oh, wonderful. But thank you for sharing that. And thank you for your candor in sharing. Yes, we all do make mistakes sometimes of this kind, and we learn for it. And thank you. Anish, before we open up the questions to the others, I have a question that how are you reading this whole crisis that the planet is facing and the world is facing? And what is your message for the young people on this digital channel? A lot of young people are part of this conversation today. And so how are you reading the situation? And what are your insights that you would like to share with the young people?
So, first is I'd say that this is clearly unprecedented because we haven't seen lockdowns like this or an impact both on the personal side and the economic side. Um, it's not over as yet. It's likely that there may be a second wave that comes in. We have to be prepared for it. It's likely that there will be a greater economic shock as well. We have to be prepared for that also. But what we are seeing in the world today is uh, VUCA is an understatement. The world is a lot more volatile now. And therefore, from an individual standpoint as well as from a professional standpoint, um, we need to plan in a very different way. We need to think of scenarios and be able to adapt quickly to an emerging scenario and be agile enough to act on it. Um, for the folks who are much younger, uh, hopefully living through this crisis will put you in much better stead, and everything from here is a positive. And hopefully you won't have to see a crisis like this ever again. Um, but for folks who are also have seen a number of things in the past, recognize the fact that we've been charmed as a generation. Right? We really haven't seen something significant happening around the world. What happened in World War One, what happened in World War Two, disrupted lots and lots of lives around the world for a very significant amount of time. Um, and from that standpoint, we've been lucky that we haven't had such global conflicts. Right? This is one that is testing us now. Uh, but I think we have to live through it. We have to take the actions accordingly. We have to balance um, livelihood and lives and make sure that we can have both do well. Um, and I've seen a lot of people step up and not be deterred by this, but face into it, make difficult calls, and find ways and find solutions. And as I said, we will need more of that because I don't think we're at the end of it as yet.
Yeah. Okay, great. One last quick question. You are going to be leading a conglomerate, which is a diversified group. And with a federal structure, as Anand once told me, Anil, we have boards of different companies. From the corporate center, we can be the center of influence. We cannot mandate because every company has its own board. So it's an interesting conversation to have that how do you influence, how do you earn the right to be listened to as the group leader and lead this conglomerate and this whole, sort of different diversified businesses in this difficult time. So what are some of the initial things that are striking to you, which are coming to you to say, this is the way we are going to lead this conglomerate to overcome this crisis?
Having run businesses, Anil, I have always had a very healthy disrespect for corporate. And that has served me very well. I remember in the GE days, we'd have folks from corporate coming in, and I'd basically look at them and assess, are they going to add value? If they're going to add value, I want an unfair share of their time. Because I'm paying the same amount from my business as to corporate based on a certain percentage that they've calculated. If I get more of your time, that's better for me. But if you're not going to add value, I'd prefer you stay as far away as possible. Right?
Sure.
So that's something I learned in G. I had a corporate role in G at one point as well, which helped see it from the corporate side. But especially after running businesses, it made it much easier coming into Mahindra. And I came into a corporate role at Mahindra first. So there it was very clear that the only way to work with businesses is to add value and to have a pull. And that applies to your question right now as well. It is thinking about how do we add value to businesses. The minute we go in and say, we're going to do reviews once a month, or we're going to look at questions we're going to ask you every week, right? That's a recipe for disaster. That comes back to empowerment. That comes back to encouragement, letting leaders run, and being there to add value, to provide the direction, to connect the dots, to help synergize. Those are the things that help take the group forward.
Very nice, very nice. So thank you. And I think there are many questions already bubbling up. So let me turn to the questions now. Vineet Taneja, who's a practicing advisor, coach, consultant, he says, when non-promoters take over from promoters as CEO, they walk into rather big shoes to fill. But they walk in with their own thinking. So what vision and priorities are you seeing for the group and what is different?
So I would agree with the big shoes to fill, remarkably big shoes to fill. And in many ways, I don't see it as shoes to fill as such. I think it's walking alongside to some extent. The biggest factor for us is continuity through change. So we're being very particular about what should change, what should not. For us, governance and values is critical. And that's part that will continue. There is no change to that. What we are changing right now is the focus on fiscal discipline. That's something that over the last few years, for a variety of reasons, that had reduced. It was very strong much earlier in the Mahindra Group. So we're sort of reverting back to who we were. And I don't see as much of a challenge whether it's a promoter or whether it is a transition in any large company. Any new leader is going to come with their own thoughts. I think the what I've seen, at least based on various different instances inside and outside, as an insider and outsider, is it's important for the new leader to really establish a certain level of continuity. There are times when leaders come in and say everything that happened in the past was wrong. That really destroys an organization. Because there are lots of things always good about an organization. Recognizing the institutions that have been built over time, recognizing the contributions that people have made in the organization over time is important. Yes, there may be things that the leader wants to put as his or her own imprint, but more important than his or her imprint is where does the organization go? And I think having the organization hat before your own hat is really the more important thing.
Wonderful. Monica Tata from Portugal, she's been part of our, she's very regular in our Thursday series and she's from Portugal. She says, having such an entrepreneurial sort of role model as your mother, that so much impacted your view of life, professional and personal. How do you, dear sir, interpret the inequalities women face daily in the workforce and sadly worldwide?
I am deeply troubled by that, right? And I do feel that there is a lot more that can be done to create that equality. Uh, Let me share some examples from my G Capital days. G Capital has this process called Session C, where they evaluate people and teams and look at them. And when I came into G Capital, just a couple of months later, I had my Session C with my boss in the US. And on the first page, typically you have photographs of all your direct team members. I had 24 direct reports. And my boss looks at me and looks at that page and says, where's the next page? And I asked him, I have 24 direct reports. Isn't that enough? He said, well, I just see one female on this and 23 male. I thought you had more females on your team. Is this a diversity ratio that we want? And that was a GE culture. That's what I had grown up with in GE. Over the 5 years that I was there, we went from 1 out of 24 to a 44% female ratio on my senior leadership team.
Very good.
And a lot of it was coaching I got along the way. So one of my direct reports told me, she said, look, you spend time one-on-one with all of us, and we really like that, right? But you're busy through the day, so you usually spend time in the evening over a drink. And that, again, is something that we like spending that time. But she said, why don't you have either lunch or an evening? Right? Because if you want to create a greater culture of diversity, you got to be aware of these things. And it's not as if women won't want to spend their time, but they will spend it, but they'll feel uncomfortable because they may want to be at home with their families. Or sometimes men may want to do that as well. So there were various things like that that I picked up over time that made me a little more conscious around here are things that we need to do differently. It's not about big things. Yes, it's about big things as well. But even if you get that right, there are a lot of small things that need to be done. So that awareness really needs to percolate through the organization. I must say that I have a big task cut out at Mahindra as well. We need to do a lot more from a diversity standpoint. And that's something that we have been looking at and seeing what we, the actions that we need to take on it.
Wonderful. One of our students in soil saying that he's heard that, Mahindra is taking a close look at businesses, and if some businesses do not really have the potential, you are thinking of exiting those businesses. He just wonders what would be the consequences to the people when you close down a business, and how much of alternate thinking is Mahindra doing before saying we are going to exit. It's just because you also have the other values of compassion. So he's just wanting to know, how is the organization balancing this thing about exit at the same time taking care of the people?
That's a great question. And exit really has to be only the last option. So right now what we're doing is doing a very detailed exercise with our loss-making businesses to see whether we can turn them around and put them on a path to profitability. Where we cannot turn them around, then we have to look at exit as an option. Where exit is an option, then the first step there again is to look at either an alliance or a partnership with someone that allows us to exit the business, keep the business running. In some cases, we may take a minority stake. We've done that in a few instances. One specific example was we had Mom and Me as a retail chain, which we then sold to a company called First Cry. We retained a stake in that. First Cry is still running it, and it turned out very well for the employees. Uh, Other cases where we've sold the business with a conversation with the buyers that you take it as is with all the employees. So there are various different ways that we can set it up. And that helps balance both the needs of shareholders and the needs of employees and the Mahindra values around employees.
Thank you. Deen Dayalan, who runs a large organization which works at the grassroots level. He works with blue-collar workers in manufacturing. And he says, is this a time to encourage people below 40, especially blue-collar workers, to get into leadership roles? And the people who are above 50 to be becoming more like mentors, or even sending them on deputation to educational institutions for a few years. So in other words, he has some very interesting new idea of getting some young people with a shop floor bias. I mean, some kind of a flavor. So he's talking about, what's your response to a innovative idea like that?
So I have never seen age as a barrier to anything. Given my example, I really shouldn't say that age can ever be a barrier. And it's about recognizing the passion in a person and giving them the experiences and the ability to do more. I've grown up with that. Right? In GE, at the age of 29, I was on the top leadership team of a company in North Carolina that GE had, which made $500 million of net income. Everyone else on the leadership team was 15 years older than I was. In Southern US, white male. At that point in time, I will be honest in saying I did not even feel that. It was only many years later when I reflect on it, I said, how did that happen? Right? But that was a culture of openness saying, merit will get you where you need to go. And it's not about age. It's not about anything else. It's about, can you do what you have to do to meet your job requirements? So I would say, yes, absolutely. If there's a passionate person on the shop floor who wants to do more, that person should have the ability to be able to get those experiences. You don't go from sort of place A to place M immediately. You may have to take certain experiences along the way. But that is something an organization should always be open to doing, recognizing the talent, giving them the runway, regardless of age. And I would also say Anand did that with me as well. When I came into Mahindra, if he had not done that, and he had said explicitly, he said that will cause some kind of some reactions in the organization. And it obviously did cause some reactions in the organization. But that's something that, again, I think is a very healthy sign to make sure that there are no barriers that are placed in front of anyone. It's merit that takes you forward.
Wonderful. Shavastika Paul, one of the students from our new campus in the School of Business Design, she asked the question, who is your role model and how has she or he inspired you? Can you name a quality or a trait they have that you have really, and partly you answered it earlier when you talked about your mother, you also talked about Snail and other people in your life. But if you were to choose a particular role model and what you admire most about that person, would you like to share that?
I won't have a specific role model. Right? There are various traits from various people. From my mother, it was do whatever you want to do. Right? There is no limit to what you can be. Right? From my father, it was whatever you do, do well. Right? Don't sort of do 97%, not enough. From Snail, it was be nice to everyone, right? Be a better person. From my friend, who I haven't talked about, Apurva, very close college friend, right? It was about appreciating lots of finer qualities in life, and sort of the meaning of friendship, and really being grounded and down to earth. From Anand, a tremendous amount of things, especially with regard to empowerment, of trying to find the best in people, One of my mentors, who I'll mention, Janmejaya Sinha at BCG, right? One of the things he told me was very helpful to me when I came into Mahindra. He said, Anish, you have a choice when you go there. You can treat it as a home or as a hotel. There'll be a lot of things that don't work. Right? So you can tell folks there that please go and fix all of these things as if you are in a hotel, or you can treat it as your home and actually be part of the solution and go and help fix it together. Right? And that has served me very well. So there's a lot I've learned from various people over time.
Very nice. Anirban Ghosh is saying that many people feel that this COVID crisis is going to be dwarfed by the even more challenging climate crisis. So how do you propose the Mahindra Group is going to prepare for the climate change crisis that is facing the planet?
So first thing I'll say, hopefully not. This crisis is enough for us in itself. I'm hopeful that there isn't a bigger crisis. But that said, we have to do our part on it. Right? We have to do everything we can to avert the climate crisis. It is real. My initial statement aside, it is real. And it's not just the Mahindra Group, but it's organizations, it's countries. Each of us have to play our own role. It's individuals as well. Every individual who's now looking at sorting out their garbage into certain things so it can be recycled the proper way, to organizations doing a number of activities to look at clean technology and help leave a lot of things behind that improve the planet, and to countries making decisions that are better for the planet overall. I think all of that is required. We've sometimes taken 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Specifically with regard to the Mahindra Group, actually, we've done a lot of things. With regard to being water neutral in many areas, with regard to green buildings, with waste to energy businesses that we've set up, solar energy businesses that we've set up. So there's a whole host of activities that are underway at the Mahindra Group. And we've got our own ESG goals. We've got targets that we put in place for carbon credits for each of our businesses. And that will contribute. But I still think that we can do a lot more. At the same time, the world can do a lot more.
Very nice. Mukesh Agarwal is asking a question. What are the top 2 or 3 changes which you will really want to bring about at the strategic level in the Mahindra Group?
So first I'd say is we are reverting back to our fiscal discipline days. That's the first change. The Mahindra Group or the M&M share stock actually had a very nice run for 17 years as the best performing stock in Nifty. A lot of people don't remember this. And this wasn't too far back. It was 2002 to 2018. For a 17-year period, it was the best performing stock in Nifty. Right? And then we sort of fell off a cliff over the last 20 months or so. And we are now trying to get back and emulate that 17-year run. So one is it's getting back to our roots of fiscal discipline. The second is not a change, but continuing our focus on growth and entrepreneurship. We have been able to develop and grow significant businesses in the past. We have identified 10 what we call growth gems, and we feel very confident of being able to take these gems and grow them into big businesses going forward. And the third part is really also continuing the focus on our stakeholders and our communities. Right? Our credo is really to help our communities rise. And that's an important part that we cannot forget in our quest for shareholder return.
Wonderful. Sabi Bhattacharya, who is head of HR for Philip Carbon Black in this interesting company, he says, how did your business adapt to this tumultuous situation? And what are some of the horizontal deployments of business decisions which cut across the whole organization? Like you talked about financial discipline. What else? And were there certain decisions which were vertically deployed? He's talking particularly in the context of a manufacturing organization.
So in the context of manufacturing, and if I heard right, in the current situation or in the COVID situation, the first step actually was securing cash. And that was a vertical decision. So the approach we took was first even defining cash. because end of March, the debt markets had started freezing up. And it wasn't easy to even sell paper that was AAA rated in the market at that point. So we defined cash as any cash in the bank or a security that can be converted to cash by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. So that got everyone on the same page saying, as you look at your cash, it has to be accessible because it may be in an illiquid security that doesn't do anyone any good. The second part is, well, how many months of cash do you have to survive, assuming there are no revenues? And we saw the month of April with no revenues. And we didn't know at that point in time how much longer it would go on. And then the third part to that was, what are various activities that can be taken to conserve cost without impacting employees? So those were a set of vertical decisions that were taken, saying every business must do this. Let's look at it together. And then wherever we need to redeploy cash, where we need to raise funds, let's do that. So that safety and security is one. The second thing was actually more important than the first one, was safety and security of our employees. And what are actions that were required for that? Which also, I wouldn't say it was a vertical decision. I think it was more a collaborative view. We quickly set up a task force comprising of leaders across all our key businesses, which met on a daily basis and looked at what needs to be done to make sure our employees are safe and secure. And the third part to that, which was also more horizontal, was each company was coming up with different ways to help the community. Whether it was looking at setting up ventilators or manufacturing masks, face shields, PPE kits, Mahindra Holidays giving their resorts for quarantine purposes, Tech Mahindra doing a lot with various apps that helped with regard to this crisis. So each business was coming up with their own ways to help the community. So these were some of the things that I would say we've done in this particular time.
JB Cherian, who's a senior executive, who was a senior executive with IBM, now is helping Sadhguruji to create a new Institute of Leadership near Bangalore. He says in leadership succession, there are many more successions that have failed than succeeded. Examples are galore. GE, Boeing, Tata Sons in the first instance, Infosys, etc. All of these companies are very sophisticated companies that hired the best consultants and did the process right. What is the secret sauce to getting the succession right in your view?
The honest answer to that is I'll find out in the next 5 years. Right.
Yeah.
What I can say, at least what I'm trying to do right now, is ensure that the organization comes first, always, right? And that makes it much easier because you have to be able to let go. There are various things I'd look at and say, I'd really want to do it this way, but it's not the right time for the organization. The other part is also being very conscious about what you're changing, what you're not, and what messages you're sending. So people should understand, because everyone has an anxiety around what's going to happen. We have a new leader. How is that new leader going to change my life? And therefore being able to address directly that these things will not change. That yes, certain things will change, and here's a rationale for change. Here's why this is important. And if you feel it should not, then let's have a conversation around it. Let's be open around it. And more importantly, maintain that continuity through change. It's very tempting for any leader to come in and say, I've had experiences in life, I know what has worked, and therefore let me do everything tomorrow. But it's different in a different context. And understanding that context and what works in that context and what doesn't is important. Right? So that's my view right now. Whether it's right or wrong, you and I will find out in some time.
R.R. Nair, whom you might know, the former Unilever director and advisor and coach, he wants to know he says you have had a fascinating leadership journey. He says, what's your view on the future of work?
Lots of views on that. Let me start with the past first. One of my good friends and colleagues Rohit Thakur, was head of HR for GE, and he moved on to Microsoft as head of HR. And I was still at GE Capital at that point, and he called me over and said, "Look, we set up this great new office at Microsoft, which was wonderful. It was a completely open office. No one had fixed seating. Uh, it was designed for 70% of the workforce because typically 70% was in office at any point in time. And you went in, you had your own locker, you picked things from the locker, went to your seat, and first come, first serve. So if you got in early, you got the seat you wanted. But a very well designed office, very contemporary, lots of open spaces, lots of spaces where you can sit and have coffee. It was a very different workplace than we had ever seen before, and no offices for anyone. You had conference rooms. So I came back to G Capital very excited and talked to my team about this and said, Rohit has just shown the office that they've set up. It sounds great. Should we do this as well? And I had a near mutiny because folks said, well, we have to give up our offices. I can't imagine going back and sitting in a cubicle. I said, look, I'm ready to do that. But that's a mindset change, right? So now coming back to the question, as we think about future at work, I think the quick reaction often is that, yes, we can do a lot more work from home. We can all work in cubicles and sort of have open offices, but we have to balance it. There is also a reality around some people preferring to work from offices. Not everyone may have the space at home to be able to work effectively at home or efficiently at home. There is value to creating relationships in offices. Uh, so, how do we balance the fact that we can be effective in working from home? Uh, we need to be in office from a relationship standpoint, which often supersedes everything else. And we need to have the right office setup where there's certain emotional needs as well of people that are met, uh, as compared to a very rational decision, right? This is where again I would credit Snail with that, because I typically will go with the rational decision and she will sort of bring me back to the emotional side very often. Um, but those are things that we've got to really put in perspective. So I don't have a clear answer as to this is the new future and this is what it should be. I think it requires, again, a thought process within the context of every organization. It requires a collaborative decision amongst the leaders and every single person in that organization, and then set it up for what's best in that context.
Wonderful. Rakesh Ponder, who's an IIT Mumbai alumnus, and Vivek Tripathi, former colleague of mine, who now heads HR for the Biba Group. The both of them are asking similar questions. Rakesh is saying, what are the 2 or 3 areas in India which can make this Atmanirbhar Bharat really happen, and therefore we can then make for the world? And Vivek is also saying, how do you see India's growth story in the next few years, and what are the opportunities that Mahindras could get into as a result of India growth story, and also Rakesh's question on Atmanirbhar Bharat and making for the world?
So I'll take the second part first. I'm very optimistic. I think India is poised for a significant amount of growth over the next 20 to 30 years. Um, I do believe that we have all the capabilities for that. And also, the government is taking all the right actions. There's a lot of activity going on right now. We've been close to some of it. And there are a number of steps being taken that will position India very well. So, from all of those standpoints, I feel very optimistic. The one thing that we do need, though, which we don't fully have, is predictability. And that really makes a big difference in terms of the willingness to put in capital, because you need to make sure that if a policy is drafted a certain way, it's not going to change tomorrow, or it is not at the whims and fancies of any person to change certain things tomorrow once you put in the investment.
Very good.
We need infrastructure as well, but more than infrastructure, I think predictability is an important part. Once that comes in, we'll find our ways around it and we'll find ways to do things.
Thank you. Anish, what a joy to host you this evening. And, it's so wonderful. Here are the 5 things that I learned with you today and from you. 1, never have regrets. that you did not do something that was important in life. And so your choice that you will always come back and spend the weekends home and that your kids will have the first right on your calendar. What a wonderful way to state that priority. Two, the family as an institution and the lessons you learned from your father and your mother and your partnership with Snehal and learning with her and from her. Wonderful. Third, you genuinely believe in diversity, not just gender diversity, which you brought out, which is a big deal for you, but also diversity of learning from different age groups. You practice that. Number four, you've always had this mindset that if I am learning, if I am adding value, I don't have to worry about a future. I will have the self-confidence that I'm making a contribution. Then you said there has to be an underpinning all the time that merit must prevail. Merit is what must be valued. And at the same time, you said that, and you made a very, very important statement. You said there is a need to conserve cash, there is a need to reduce cost, but without impacting people negatively. I just want to congratulate you, Anand, and everybody for building a first-rate Indian company that we are all very proud of. And thank you, Anish, for showing us the way that good old middle-class Indian values can give you the strength of character that you can be amongst the best in the world and you can really contribute in the right way to make the world better. So thanks a lot, Anish, for coming this evening. And I'm sure so many people on this program are thrilled with your presence today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anil. It's truly been a pleasure and I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.